Here's another beginner pumpkin painting tutorial. Start with your mop brush and pick colors for your background. I want it to be bright, so I'm using a bright Seafoam Green and a little bit of tan on my brush together. And then on my 16 by 20 stretch canvas, I'm just going to do simple up and down strokes, blending those colors together. Keep dipping into those shades. I'm even going to dip into a little bit of dark brown and continue blending as you go. See how fun those colors are as they all play together. Don't overblend because you don't want it to turn all into one shade, but you also don't want stripes. Find that happy medium and just keep adding colors as you go. Once you have the canvas completely covered, then you can dry it so we can paint something for the pumpkins to sit on. We don't want our pumpkins to be floating, so clean off your mop brush and take some of that dark brown. Just do one long back and forth stroke at the bottom of your canvas, bring it all the way down, and while it's still wet, you can make it look like wood grain by dipping into some tan and just blending in some of that as well. It's up to you how subtle you do this. You can make it really bright or really blend it in like this. Once you have the background dry, we can finally paint our pumpkins. To do this, we're going to start with a white layer to get the shape and a large round brush. Dip into the white and let's create a long oval. Notice how the oval goes into that dark brown stripe just a little bit so it looks like it's sitting on the table. And then at the top, make sure you point it a little bit. Not a crisp point, it's curved, but it makes it look like the top of an egg. And then fill in the oval with white. We're doing white first because then when we paint the orange on it, it's going to be bright orange. To add to the pumpkin, do 2 curved lines coming out from each side of the egg shape. And notice how each of those curves are up a little bit higher than that first curve in the middle. Almost looks like it has a mustache, I like to say. To connect the curves to the pumpkin, make a curve coming from the top and swoop it down and connect it to that bottom curve. Almost looks like a backwards C and a letter C on the other side. Notice the curves at the top are a little bit higher than that middle curve. And fill them in with white paint as well, sticking along with the shape. I'm even gonna curve both sides a little bit more. Already starting to look like a pumpkin. To keep adding sections to the pumpkin though, you can keep adding those mustaches and then making the backward C's and letter C's. Just keep in mind that each section, to make it look round, will get slightly thinner and also slightly higher than the section before it as well. Keep filling each of them with white paint. Now, when you're doing this white layer, make sure you're doing it as evenly as possible. You don't want any paint buildup so that the orange will go on really smoothly when it's dry. So dry the pumpkin shape, and let's give him a friend first. So taking more white paint, down here on the right-hand side in the brown, I'm going to do a smaller U. And everything we did to the big pumpkin, we're going to repeat it, but just a little bit smaller. This one's about 2/3 the height of my big pumpkin. So we have the egg shape and filled it in. Let's give it the mustache. And then create those backward C's and letter C's, filling it in as we go. Now filling in this one on the left is really easy. I'm not even gonna add more paint there because it's already white. Just fill in that bottom corner, but make sure to do it on the right side as well. Let's do another little curve coming up here. Because it's smaller, you can really see the height difference and the size difference in each of these sections. Fill that in. I'm even going to take a little bit of tan and just do a curve here so I can see it. It kind of disappeared going in front of that big pumpkin. Now make sure they're dry and pick out colors for your pumpkin. Of course, I'm going to use orange, and again, we did white first so that it would really pop. So fill in your big pumpkin the exact same way you did with the white, but because we did it white first, it's going to be a bright orange instead of a dull orange mixed with that green in the background. While the orange is still wet, I'm also taking a little bit of yellow and blending some in the middle of that oval to give it a highlight. I'm going to do that in each of my pumpkin sections. So see this one on the left, I'm going to fill in with orange first, nice and even, and then while it's still wet, take a little bit of yellow and then brush it in. You don't have to brush it over the whole thing, just that middle section. Same thing on this outside edge here. Be careful around the edge so you can see a little bit of the orange blending in with that green. See the difference, how dull it is. And while it's still wet, blend in a little bit of that yellow. There we go. Do the same thing to the other side, but don't forget your little pumpkin is there. So I'm going to outline that side along the bottom, and then I'm only going to do the highlight on this top edge. So fill that in with orange there, and then add the yellow. Dry that really good then when you're finished. And for this little pumpkin on the bottom, it's already white, so I don't have to do too much to it, but I'm going to actually make it a really light tan color. You can do whatever color pumpkins you want, really. There's so many different kinds. I'm just doing white and tan together, filling in the sections as I go. You can add highlights with just white then. I'm going to do each of the sections as even as possible. And when you have them both filled in, dry them really good so we can add the shading to the ribs. To do this, I'm going to take dark brown, but I'm mixing it with orange as well so it doesn't get too dark. So start by painting the brown and orange in the middle of the rib. See how it's a little bit darker there? And then dip into just orange and blend in the edges on either side. So I'm taking that orange and blending this left side here as well. See, it's starting to look like a shadow. It's not too dark, but if you really want to define the ribs, then you can go back in with just dark brown and make it really dark along that outline. It's completely up to you if you like to make the ribs really dark or if you want them to be just kind of in the background. So on the left side here, let's take the dark brown and orange together and outline the left side of this oval, and then right away dip into orange and blend each of the edges. It's important that you are doing the blending while the paint is still wet. If you were to paint each of the ribs first and then try to go back and blend it, I guarantee it wouldn't work because acrylic craft paint dries so fast. It would already be dry and then your ribs would be really, really dark. And while you're working fast and have the color on your brush, you can also do a little bit of shading on the bottom of each of the sections. I always say start lighter, and then you can always go back in and darken sections later like I'm doing here. I'm going to do my ribs a little bit darker after I do my subtle shading. So on the left side here, same exact theme, dark brown and orange together along the middle of the rib, and then take your orange and blend out each of the edges. You don't have to do as much on this right side here because it's above your white pumpkin. Same thing, just try not to get too much of the dark brown into your little pumpkin, but whatever you do get into it, we will be able to fix up later. Now, when the pumpkin is dry, if you want brighter highlights, you can just brush on a little bit more of bright white along the top edges of each of the sections. And then when that's dry, blend in a little bit of orange and yellow. See how that really makes it pop? It's up to you, but that can help if some of your sections got a little bit too dark while you are blending, because I know the shading can be a little bit difficult. You can always go back and make it brighter. I'm gonna darken just a couple more sections on my ribs here. And then this little pumpkin, I kind of like it the way it is, but I am going to take a little bit of dark brown and then blend it in with some tan and white. Again, super subtly, the same way we did with the orange. And then you can go back in and make it a little bit darker in the middle. For the details in the little pumpkin, I did switch to a smaller size 3 round brush. Let's make a couple of the ribs a little bit darker here. There we go. Dry them. I know the big pumpkin kind of looks like a basketball, but to fix that, take a size 1 round brush and some dark brown. To help separate the pumpkins from the background, I like to outline the outside edges. Do along each of the sides, even along the bottom, and take your time with it. This makes all of the difference. Something else that makes all the difference then is actually adding a stem, so I suggest doing that first before you change anything. Start with a line that tilts up to the right like that. I'm going to do a letter C curve on the left-hand side here. And then it's a little bit shorter than that top one, so make a curved line that goes up to a point like that. That's my favorite style pumpkin stem. To do the bottom, kind of outline the top edges of the top of the pumpkin there, and then fill it in with a solid color. I'm using dark brown for this. Now for the little pumpkin, you're going to do the exact same thing, just make it smaller. So the tilted line going up to the right from the left, letter C coming from the right, and then connect the two with a curved line. Notice how the tip of the stem is directly above the middle of the stem. Outline the top edges of the pumpkin for the bottom of the stem, and then fill it in with dark brown. Now they look like pumpkins. To have some fun with it, we can add some vines with some dark green and a smaller round brush. Do some loop-de-loops coming off the corner of each of your stems. Have fun with it. Take your time. See, I'm going to go over it again. If you don't get it on the first pass, that's okay. You can fill it in. Even add a couple little branches coming off. Don't make it too detailed, but this really does make it fun. The smaller pumpkin's gonna have one going in front of the large pumpkin, and let's do another loop-de-loop coming off of here. It'll be a double loop. How fun is that? Do little tiny lines coming off there as well. And you could stop there, but I like to add leaves using a fan brush. I'm gonna dip into dark and light green, loading up the side of the brush, and then press down and pull up like a stamp. That makes a simple leaf. I suggest practicing this technique first if you do it, but it's just like a stamp then, and you can add them all over the place. Load it up as needed. If you don't have a fan brush, you could just paint leaves in, that's up to you, or you could even use the technique I used in my last pumpkin painting by taking a leaf and painting it and using that like a stamp. Make sure they're connected to the vines and have them kind of going all different directions. There we go. You don't have to do too many. At the very end, I suggest adding highlights to everything because that makes it pop. So I'm taking my smaller round brush and some white paint and brushing it on along the top edge. And while it's still wet, take some dark brown from the stem and blend in those edges as well. That makes it look like there's light shining on it and makes it look a little bit more three-dimensional. Do the same thing to the smaller pumpkin. If you need to switch to a smaller brush to add the highlight here, you can definitely do that. Just brush in some white paint along the top edges and then blend in that with a little bit of dark brown. And I also like to add highlights in the middle of my vines. I'm not outlining them completely with white, but just kind of like around some of the curves in different sections. See how it makes it look like the light is shining on that as well. Don't forget the little pumpkin. You could use a detail brush again for this if you're not good with a light touch and the brush. And I like to add little bits of white highlights to the top edges of the pumpkins, keeping it inside that dark outline. And there's our pumpkin painting. You could also add polka dots as another variation. Don't forget to make it your own. Either way is perfectly acceptable. And if you want to check out other pumpkin painting tutorials, I'll have them in the description below as well. Have fun and happy painting, everybody.